Welcome back, friends, to this brand new Techhandy course on VMware vSphere 7. If you're interested in VMware virtualization, you're in the right place. In today's video, we are going to dive into one of the most fundamental networking components in VMware vSphere, the vSphere Standard Switch, also known as VSS. We'll start by discussing what a vSphere Standard Switch is, where it's used, and why it matters in virtualized environments. Then, we'll go through all the hands-on tasks step by step, including how to create and delete a vSphere standard switch, how to add, configure, or remove virtual NICs on a standard switch, how to configure VMkernel ports for services like vMotion, management, fault tolerance, esxi, NFS, and more. What is port group and how to add and remove port groups. And finally, determine the right use cases for a vSphere standard switch. Let's get started. A vSphere standard switch is a virtual network switch available on each esxi host. It provides basic network connectivity for virtual machines, virtual NICs, VMkernel network services, and uplink connections to physical switches. Every esxi host can have one or more vSphere standard switches, and each switch is managed individually on each host. These standard switch is ideal for small environments, standalone hosts, labs, or where no centralized switch management is required. vSphere standard switch connect virtual machines together and virtual machines to the physical network. It has the ability to move layer 2 traffic, just like a traditional network switch would between virtual machines internally on each of your esxi hosts. This means that the virtual machines on the same network that are on the same esxi host can exchange traffic. The traffic never have to leave the host or go to a router as long as those virtual machines are on the same network. A port group is a management concept, and it's going to be a part of a vSphere standard switch. The default port group on a vSphere standard switch is the virtual machine network, also known as the VM network. Once these virtual machines are created and their VNICs are connected to the vSphere standard switch, they can communicate one and another virtually all inside this esxi host. The outside network doesn't have to be the internet, it could just be another esxi host or other network services that are running on the local area network. vSphere standard switch would have an uplink. That uplink connection would go to a PNIC, or a physical network interface card, on this physical esxi host. That physical network interface card would then be connected to a physical switch, just like any other physical server in the data center. From there, the physical switch would be connected to the local area network, and then from there, perhaps to a router that goes out to the internet. A vSwitch is commonly called a VSS, or a vSphere standard switch. Standard switches have some advanced networking features, such as traffic shaping, network interface card teaming, security policies, and Cisco Discovery Protocol support. You can have up to 4,096 switch ports per host, with 1,016 of these being active, and up to 512 port groups per switch. You can have up to 16 vSphere standard or distributed switches per host. On vSphere client, there is a default port group called simply VM network. That's the virtual machine port group where virtual machines that are created connect by default to the vSphere standard switch. Port groups are very much a management concept, as you can configure features like traffic shaping, teaming, and failover on a port group basis. Every virtual switch has a number of virtual ports. Just like a physical switch where you plug in a physical network interface cable, you are connecting a virtual network interface card to a virtual port on a virtual switch. The esxi host itself needs to connect to the network for management functionality, and it uses VMK interfaces with VMK0 being the default VMkernel port. This is where the IP address will be configured for the esxi host for management. You can think of management network as the virtual port group that's created by default and cannot be removed where the VMkernel interface resides on the virtual switch. VM NICs map to the physical network adapters that connect to the physical network. An esxi host might have one or more multiple physical network interface cards or physical adapters, and each one of their physical adapters is going to map to what's called a VM NIC on the esxi host. Those VM NICs might serve as the uplink for virtual machines to access the physical network, or you can have one or more multiple VM NICs in use for management of that host and for network redundancy. PNICs are physical network adapters, whereas the VNIC or virtual network interface card is the virtual network adapter that, by default, will be configured on each of your virtual machines, and you are not limited to just a single virtual machine network adapter, or VNIC. You can have up to 10 virtual network adapters on each virtual machine. By default, we have a standard switch already created. We will see how to create a new standard switch, and how to delete that switch. Under any of your node, you can see under networking, one standard switch created by default. And all these hosts happens to have 4 physical adapters that we assigned at the time of creating these hosts. Under that network, you can see we have the VM network created by default. On this network, there is one virtual machine and 4 hosts. If you click on that VM network, it will take us to the network inventory. Let's see how to configure this network. This is a virtual network and we're using the standard switch. We don't have centralized configuration of any networking settings. Instead, we have to go into each host, into Configuration tab, and then into Networking. The below diagram tells us we have, by default, the management network. This is where our VMkernel port is, that VMK0 interface with the IP of 10.20.30.105, which is actually the IP address of this host. That's how this host is managed on the network. We also have the VM network, which is our port group on this virtual switch. The standard virtual switch, also known as vSwitch 0, is represented the middle vertical box. The VM network is the default virtual machine port group created on this vSphere standard switch. In this case, we have one virtual machine that is part of the default VM network. To add a new standard switch on this host, we need to click on Add Networking, then choose to add a new virtual machine port group for a standard switch. Next, we could either choose an existing standard switch, so we could add a second port group on vSwitch 0. Or, in our case, we can add a new standard switch. We could choose to add an uplink adapter or a physical network adapter. However, we don't have any of those configured at this point. We could use this new vSwitch for just virtual machine to virtual machine communication, for example, to create a virtual lab environment. Let's assume we need the virtual lab environment, where we want to create some virtual machines, and test communications and applications on those virtual machines without any network connectivity. So we called this private vSwitch. Notice here that you can configure VLANs, if you choose to use VLANs. You can see, vSwitch 1 is created, it's standard vSwitch, and it created a private vSwitch port group on vSwitch 1. There are no physical network adapters connected to this vSwitch. Let's say we want to create a virtual machine for this demonstration. When we go to connect this virtual machine, notice by default, it's connected to the private vSwitch. You can browse and could choose to connect it to the default VM network, because if we connect it to private vSwitch, it will be connected to this new vSwitch 1, which has no physical network access. Now if we see under that host, we can see we have this test01 virtual machine connected, and it's using the new private vSwitch that we just created. Let's power on this machine, so it will link to this new network. What if we want to remove this new switch? If we try remove directly, it will give us operation failed error. It's because we have an active virtual machine connected to this vSwitch, so it will not let us delete that vSwitch because of this virtual machine. Let's move this machine to default VM network and try to remove it again. Now, let's try remove it again. We will able to remove this time. So that's how to create and delete a vSphere standard switch. VNICs, or Virtual Network Interface Cards, on your virtual machines are what allow the virtual machines to communicate with the virtual switch, and thus with other virtual machines or even out onto the physical network. For this demo, we are having Windows Server 2016 and suppose we can create multiple virtual NICs on a virtual machine, because suppose we have an application that requires multiple IP addresses. We need those multiple virtual network interface cards to connect to multiple port groups on the same virtual switch. The virtual switch has a maximum of 4096 virtual ports, and they are created by default on a vSphere standard switch, so you don't have to create a virtual port, and you don't create the virtual NIC on the virtual switch. Instead, what you do is when you create a virtual machine, and into the settings of that machine, you can see the number of virtual network adapters, and specifically which port group this network adapter, or virtual NIC, is connected to. If we want to add a new virtual NIC, we simply add a new device on this virtual machine, go down to the network and add a new virtual network adapter. Make sure it's connected if you want to use this new network adapter. vSphere offers 3 different types of virtual network adapters, with the default being the E1000 enhanced. It's important to know that just because you added a new virtual NIC, that doesn't mean that your operating system automatically recognizes it and can use it. Just like any other device added to an operating system, it's likely you might need drivers for that devices, and might require some sort of configuration. If we go into this machine network adapters, we can see we have one Ethernet adapter called Ethernet 0. That's the machine default network adapter. Let's add this new network adapter and attach it to our new machine. And if we go back to our machine, we can now see we have new network adapter called Ethernet 1. This means, when the new virtual network interface card was added to this running virtual machine, the driver was available in Windows, and it automatically received an IP address via DHCP. So, no further configuration is required in such case. We have 2 different virtual networks connected, both with IP addresses, and they are connected to the same port group on the same virtual switch. We can also see how our virtual machine with 2 virtual NICs is connected to vSwitch 0's VM network. To remove virtual network adapter, go to Machine Settings, and remove it. Once you remove it, you can also verify under Virtual Switch. Even under machine hardware, you can see we have only default network adapter available under our 2016 machine. Every esxi host has a VMkernel network layer, and it provides connectivity to hosts, for management of that host, as well as all the critical system traffic for vSphere, including things like vMotion, IP storage for network file systems, fault tolerance, VMware vSAN, vSphere replication, and much more. Let's see how to configure VMkernel ports for network services. By default, we have a single VMkernel adapter, and it's called VMK0. It's connected to the network label, which is called Management Network, which is on physical vSwitch 0. Let's suppose we need to have redundant VMkernel adapters, and that way, if one physical network interface card goes down or lost connectivity, we will have redundant management connection to our esxi host. Click on Add Networking, then select VMkernel Network Adapter, and then we have a choice of where we want this VMkernel adapter connected. Do we want to connect to existing network, do we want to connect it to existing standard switch, or we want to create a new standard switch? Let's go with existing vSwitch 0. Now we get to give this VMkernel port a network label and configure IP settings. You can also enable services on specific VMkernel adapters. For example, it's very common to have a dedicated network adapter just for VMware vSAN, or just for vSphere replication, or just for management of the host. You can click multiple if you choose to do so. In our case, we only going to enable management on this new VMkernel adapter. You can choose to use DHCP to obtain an IP address automatically, or configure static IP addressing. We will go with DHCP automatic assigned IP. We can see our new VMK1, our second or redundant VMkernel adapter just created. This is actually a virtual network adapter, it's not mapped directly to a physical network adapter. Or it does connect it to a physical adapter, VNIC0, where we have management network traffic going, VM network traffic going to it, and we have now our VMkernel traffic going to it, but we still just have one physical network adapter. We will need to do is to add a new physical adapter. We have currently 4 physical adapters, one is in use and other 3 physical network adapters are in a down state. Because they're not physically connected to a network switch. However, if we go in and manage the physical network adapter for this vSwitch, we can still add redundant network adapters and then can also put these in a standby or into reserved and used state. If it's a physical server, we still need to plug in this physical adapter to a physical switch, so that it will come up and be available, but now we do have redundant physical network adapters, as well as redundant IP addresses for management traffic of this esxi host. At this point, we added a VMkernel adapter and we configured VMkernel adapters. Now, what if we want to remove this new VMkernel adapter? Virtual devices are easy to add, and they're also easy to remove. You can see VMK1 adapter is now removed. As of now, the VM network is the default virtual machine port group. However, it may be beneficial to create additional port groups, so that you can customize traffic management on a set of virtual machines. Suppose, we have some virtual machines that need to be on a specific VLAN, or they have specific traffic shaping requirements. Let's create a new virtual machine port group that we can use to fulfill those requirements. We are configuring port groups on a per-host basis because that's how vSphere standard switches are configured. So, if we wanted the same port group on every host in a cluster, and we wanted to migrate our virtual machines using one host to another, we have to make sure that the virtual machine port group names remain the same between hosts, so that when the virtual machines migrate, they're still connected to the same virtual machine port group. To add new port group, click Add Networking, then Virtual Machine Port Group for a standard switch. We select an existing switch, which is our vSwitch 0. Give this new port group a custom network label. Suppose for this demo we will use it for traffic shaping. Our new traffic shaping port group created, that we just configured. Let's go to Edit Settings. You can see, you can configure security settings, traffic shaping, teaming and failover settings. In our case, we'll use traffic shaping, and we will override the virtual switch defaults and will enable traffic shaping. We further restrict average bandwidth, average peak, and burst size as per desired requirements. Once that's done, we can easily move a virtual machine by connecting its network adapter to the new traffic shaping port group. Now this virtual machine will have its network traffic shaped right here using the port group traffic shaping configuration. To remove the port group is also easy, but you need to make sure that any virtual machines that you've created and connected to the port group are actually migrated off to another port group before you remove your port group. vSphere standard switches are best suited for smaller, simpler, or standalone environments. They're ideal for single esxi hosts, small labs, branch offices, and places where centralized switch management isn't required. They work perfectly when vCenter isn't available yet, such as during initial esxi installation or in environments that rely on auto-deploy before the host is fully configured. Standard switches also make sense when your network design doesn't need advanced features like LACP, NetFlow, or private VLANs. Many admins use VSS for lightweight storage networks, simple VMkernel traffic, or as a reliable fallback management network in case a distributed switch fails. Because configuration is local to each host, they are useful for isolated test environments or scenarios where only one or two hosts need custom networking settings. In short, a vSphere standard switch is the right choice when you want something simple, local to the host, reliable, and easy to configure, without the need for advanced centralized network features. I hope you have now better understanding of vSphere standard switches. In the next video, we'll step up into vSphere distributed switch, VDS, central management, advanced features, and real-world deployment examples. If you enjoyed the video, please leave your feedback, like and subscribe, and share what topics you want to see next on the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.